worked in the Reagan administration, God help us, okay? We worried every day, I got up and worried every day that there was going to be a general nuclear war between the US and the Soviet Union that could kill everybody. Not just Americans, everybody. That was a feasible outcome. So there's extreme good news that the risk of nuclear Armageddon, which was the stuff of the Cold War, has been reduced now to almost zero. It's not that it's technically impossible, but the risk of it is very, very, very small. So that's good news. That shows human beings can get smarter, things can work out better, strategies pursued for a long time. This is part of the reason why I'm not a pessimist with respect to this proposition. So that's for states. Now the new problem that hadn't been focused on so clearly before 9/11, but that 9/11 sort of makes incandescent, is that now for the first time you can imagine a non-state killing at the level, doing the kind of destruction that previously was only the domain of states. So as I mentioned in the presentation, on 9/11, 19 guys killed more people, twice as many, as the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor that brought the Americans into World War II. So it is now imaginable that if Al-Qaeda or some other Islamic extremist group, or it doesn't need to be an Islamic extremist group, any other crazy group, gets a nuclear bomb made by a state, or the material for the bomb made by a state, and make themselves an elementary bomb, they might kill tens or hundreds of thousands of people. Just some crazy group. So that's why the terrorist piece of it becomes so important, and why the earlier question about getting the nuclear arsenals eliminated as fast as possible and getting the nuclear material controlled as tightly as possible and not producing more material is all part of that picture. Because while on the one hand we should be trying to reduce the number of terrorists who aspire to do horrific damage, and there's a lot to do on that front, and a lot has been done successfully, the surest way to prevent bin Laden from achieving his objective of killing 4 million people is to deny him the means for doing that.
We're about out of time, and I hate to ask as a last question, almost hate to do it, that something that implies that there might be something good about nuclear weapons. But during the Cold War, and you said you're an old Cold Warrior, it was a common belief, which probably many still hold, that ultimately the fact that the US could destroy the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union could destroy the United States, no matter who struck first, something that was known as mutual assured destruction, exerted a restraining influence that when push came to shove in a crisis, each side had to realize that they had to stop short of war. And some have even argued that in the case of India and Pakistan, that over time, as each considers the likelihood that 30 or 40 million could die, that this might even have an educational effect, that one would think over time and realize that with no alternative but peace, another approach to their relationship would have to be sought. Do you give any credence to that point of view?
Again, an excellent question, and the answer is yes, I do. That when we try to think about nuclear weapons, if we're being analytic about it, we should do all the pluses and all of the minuses. Now, one big plus is what in security studies is called the crystal ball effect. So if I'm the leader of the US or the Soviet Union in the Cold War, and I come in thinking, enough is enough, I'm simply going to go and do whatever it takes. And somebody says, well, and somebody does. I remember giving this briefing many times to Secretary Weinberger, who had become the Secretary of Defense. He hadn't been in this business for 20 years. He had been out in California, doing other stuff. I said, just understand, in the same hour that a nuclear war starts, everything here disappears. Well, that's pretty chilling. Okay? So obviously, you've got, in effect, a mutual suicide pact. Or another way people sometimes examine or explain it was like Siamese twins. So I might kill my twin, but then I think, yikes, what have I done? This is the same body that I'm attached to. So there was this, actually Churchill had a great discussion of it in which he said there's a sublime irony in which
Safety will be the sturdy child of terror.
Exactly. Safety is the sturdy child of terror, just like Siamese twins. Okay? So is that a fact? Yes. In the case, and only in the case, that you have a reliable second strike capability, that is, namely, after I've done my best to disarm you, you still are able to attack me in a manner that assuredly destroys my society. Now that's mutual assured destruction. Now nobody ever aspired to mutual assured destruction. It was a condition that occurred. The US liked a situation in which I could destroy you and be done. Okay? That's a good situation. A situation in which if I were to attack you, I basically shot myself in the head. That's not a good situation, even though it has a stabilizing impact in the relationship between these two parties. Now, what's then wrong with this stable situation? First, if it's that stable and I'm more risk-oriented than you are, I may be able to take a risk, and then you're not going to react because of your fear of committing suicide. So sadly, in the current calculations between India and Pakistan, many Pakistanis believe that this nuclear standoff provides a shield that allows them to then conduct terrorist attacks inside India, like Mumbai. So maybe they can get away with that once or twice, but at some point the politics of this may not. Okay? Or I was talking earlier with somebody from the Korean delegation. The North Korean, South Korean situation is also similar in this respect. South Korea does not have a nuclear arsenal, but South Korea's military capability is such that there's no question whatever who will be the winner in the Second Korean War. At the end of the war, South Korea will be victorious and will absorb North Korea if there should be a war. But Seoul will very likely be destroyed in the course of this war. So the threat, the ability to threaten to destroy Seoul, not even by nuclear means, by non-nuclear means, has provided a shield in effect behind which North Korea has engaged in a whole series of outrageous provocations, like sinking the ship recently or firing on an island. So I would say, while there's some positives to it, the fact that one, on the negative list, it encourages a risk taker relative to a conservative actor. So it almost invites a risk taker. And for those of us in more civilized societies, we have more to be caring about and therefore to be protecting. And secondly, it's at risk of accident or unauthorized activity. So if the machine that we've built to be so terrifying were actually to be triggered by some unauthorized or accidental events, which we know happen in the world, one might end up with the terrible, terrifying consequences that were built into it that had the positive impact. So I would say, all things considered, even though there's some positives that should be recognized, that a situation in which two states have nuclear weapons is likely to be in terms of just net present value of lives, much greater risk.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Allison, for such a stimulating event and for a stimulating talk. Just before I invited Dr. Sultan Al-Amadi,